Oral histories collected decades later painted an even darker backdrop. A woman whose grandmother had been a servant at a nearby estate recalled how locals would hurry past the convent at night. She said sometimes you could hear cries from the north wing, the granddaughter wrote. The nuns watching from the windows had eyes like empty rooms. In 1890, another specter emerged. Mary Callahan, sister of the executed enforcer, arrived at the Pinkerton agency with a leather portfolio. Inside, she carried correspondence between Mother Catherine and her network, detailed financial records, and a list of prominent figures who had shielded or patronized the operation. My brother was guilty, she told the agent, and he confessed every sin before they hanged him. But he was only a servant to a greater wickedness. The agent, disturbed, brought the documents directly to Cardinal James Gibbons rather than his superiors. No investigation followed. The documents vanished into church archives. When Mary tried to approach newspapers, editors declined for lack of verifiable evidence. Twice her home was broken into, though nothing was stolen except papers. In 1908, a fire swept through the Baltimore Archdiocesan Records Room, consuming sensitive shelves, and only those shelves. A former archivist later claimed he had been instructed to store the most dangerous documents together against all archival logic. When the fire came, it burned only what it needed to erase. The final brutal chapter surfaced far from Wisconsin. In 1912, workers renovating an abandoned mansion in Veracruz discovered a hidden room. Inside sat two mummified women, their bodies posed as if at a last quiet tea, cups arranged before them, the liquid long evaporated. Traces of poison lingered in the china. Papers nearby included forged identifications, American and Mexican currency, and a golden locket painted with the likeness of St. Mary's Convent as it had once stood. Survivors, now elderly, identified the belongings: Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark. More horrifying still were the journals found beside them. Their entries, spanning decades, detailed continued operations, acquisitions, placements, arrangements with wealthy patrons. The final note, penned in a tight, hurried hand, read simply, "He comes tonight. We have failed him for the last time." Who he was, no one could say. A high-ranking patron, a co-conspirator, or some figure born of delusion and guilt. The question remains open, suspended between rational dread and something older. Beneath the garden of that Veracruz mansion, police found the remains of a dozen young women buried over 20 years. Local news reported the discovery with a thin flame of shock. American papers, when they mentioned it at all, kept to brief, quiet columns. The church responded cautiously, acknowledging only that two former religious women, excommunicated long ago, were among the deceased. No mention was made of the journals, no acknowledgement of the graves. Back in Wisconsin, the land where St. Mary's stood passed through hands and decades until suburban houses replaced pine and stone. Children now ride bicycles over ground that once held unmarked graves. Most have never heard the name of the convent. The church's archives on the matter remain sealed, redacted, or lost. And yet, fragments keep rising. In 2018, construction workers unearthed a metal box containing a rosary, a habit veil, and a small list of names. 23 in total. Beneath it, a message written in a careful, trembling hand. "Remember us." The box now sits in diocesan custody, unprocessed, unseen. The family of Jimmy Fletcher, the farm boy who carried Sister Mary's desperate note, keeps a different memorial. On a small shelf in their farmhouse kitchen rests a silver cross, polished by generations of careful hands. Beside it is a handwritten list of the nuns' names, copied and recopied each time new research surfaced. Great-Grandpa Jimmy said truth doesn't rot, his descendant explained. Even if someone buries it, it still breathes under the soil. And so the memory lingers, quiet, persistent, like a voice behind a locked door. Between 1854 and 1862, in a building meant for mercy, human cruelty grew until it hollowed out the walls themselves. The official story was dismantled, buried, silenced. But the real story, the story of the women who lived, suffered, prayed, resisted, remains alive in fragments. Remember Sister Agnes. Remember Sister Bernadette. Remember Sister Teresa. Remember all whose names were nearly erased. Their suffering mattered. Their voices mattered. And even now, the wind at Lake Michigan sometimes seems to carry something like a prayer or a cry that refuses to fade. Sister Claire O'Donnell, who had once been forced to restrain Sister Teresa during her murder, cracked beneath the memories. Her screams in the night brought discipline rather than comfort. Her eventual institutionalization fades into the margins of archived medical notes. After 1863, her name vanishes entirely. Sister Maria Fitzpatrick lived but dimmed, transferred to a contemplative order where silence became both balm and prison. She died in 1870, her death noted blandly as nervous exhaustion. Sister Anne Sullivan carried her wounds differently. Within the constraints of vows and obedience, she began quiet networks of solace, informal circles of nuns who had suffered abuse but were forbidden to speak of it. Her letters, discovered decades later in a Boston convent, counsel compassion and vigilance. The sin, she wrote in 1875, was not God's, it was man's, masked in garments of holiness. May we never allow such garments to be so easily stolen again. The full number of victims, however, could never be fully tallied. Official church records listed 23 nuns and 17 orphan girls trafficked or murdered. But Sister Elizabeth's notebook suggested more. Rural acquisitions, young women taken quietly from isolated farms or immigrant families, their disappearances never public enough to provoke search or inquiry. Local newspapers from the era contained scattered notices. A servant girl who returned east, a farmer's daughter who married and moved west, a young widow who sought new opportunities. Whether these were ordinary vanishings or woven into the same dark web remains unanswered. Some clues surfaced in unexpected places. In 1872, a Catholic missionary in San Francisco described meeting a woman in a waterfront brothel who claimed to have once been Sister Catherine Walsh of St. Mary's. By the time the church responded, she had died of typhoid, buried without name or stone. Her final account, recorded by the missionary, echoed too closely the horrors of Wisconsin to dismiss. Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark, the architects of St. Mary's, seemed to have dissolved into the continent. Investigators glimpsed them, perhaps, in New Orleans, in Havana, in Mexico City. In each place, rumors whispered of girls taken from immigrant families, of schools and charities with locked rooms, of wealthy patrons entertained behind draped windows. A former Chicago detective hired by the New York Diocese traced them to Veracruz in 1863, where they ran a finishing school with unsettling similarities to their earlier enterprise. He reported being warned violently away. 2 local officials who agreed to accompany him were found dead before the planned inspection, their bodies left with the unmistakable marks of a message. The detective's final report, preserved in diocesan archives, ends with a tremor of dread. These women are protected by influences beyond the scope of law. Whether clerical, political, or more sinister, I cannot say. But I fear that what began in Wisconsin has taken deeper root further south. The institutional response followed familiar contours. Publicly, the Church called St. Mary's the isolated work of impostors. Privately, internal documents, later leaked, revealed Bishop Henny had received at least 7 complaints during the years the crimes occurred. Each concern had been quietly dismissed after substantial donations to the Cathedral Fund. One letter from 1856 described a blood-stained habit found in the woods. Bishop Henny instructed the reporting priest to return it to the convent with thanks, explaining it as paint from theatrical performances. 3 days later, a donation arrived. The church moved quickly to contain scandal. Bishop Henny, who had earlier rebuked Father Ryan for prying, was quietly removed, sent to a monastery in Europe to live out his days in prayerful reflection. The convent buildings were demolished, the land sold, and a new, legitimate orphanage established elsewhere. The most damning documents were sealed or disappeared into private church archives. Survivors were dispersed to other houses, required to sign confidentiality under threat of excommunication. The men whose names appeared in seized ledgers, businessmen, judges, legislators, evaded prosecution through the slow, reluctant machinery of law. Witnesses recanted, files went missing, trials collapsed. Even so, the cruelty could not be fully buried. The rescued women, their bones and voices and notebooks, insisted the truth. Some spoke and were silenced by fate or by the pressures of a society that preferred its saints spotless. Others fled the habit and the censure and carried the horror into new lives that never quite hid the hollowness in their eyes. Father Ryan, warned by what he had seen, would be reassigned to a distant parish, his final years spent writing pleas and prayers that never found full hearing. When the dust settled, what remained were fragments: a leather notebook, a scorched account book, a handful of bones, the testimony of women whose lives had been broken into pieces and reassembled poorly by a justice afraid of its own consequences. The official tally would later record 23 missing nuns, 17 trafficked girls. But the ledger's margins hinted at more: rural acquisitions, special commissions, entries that suggested appetite had metastasized into a regional industry. The question that sits at the story's center is not only how such evil could be done, but how easily the institutions meant to stop it chose instead to cut it free and look away. We will follow the trail farther: the courtrooms, the vanished letters, the brothels of Chicago and St. Louis, the graves dug under bean plots, the escape routes that led to New Orleans and beyond. In Part 3, we will trace the legal aftermath: the men who paid, the women who vanished, and the long, incomplete work of memory that still circles the ruined footprint of St. Mary's. Father Ryan's doubts deepened into conviction in the months that followed the convent's exposure. The scattered pieces, girlhood letters, coded ledgers, whispered pleas through locked doors, had revealed not an aberration, but a structure. And yet, the official channels moved with the cold deliberation of institutions fearful of light. St. Mary's was closed, yes. But in the shadows beyond Wisconsin, echoes of its methods surfaced like bodies rising under thaw. Across the Midwest, diocesan inspectors began conducting unannounced visits to convents, orphanages, and Catholic schools. Their reports, though softened by clerical language, hinted at patterns: missing novices, unexplained financial windfalls, odd visitors at dusk. None matched the scope or cruelty of St. Mary's, but the template was unmistakable: fraudulent authority, isolation, and the use of religious sanctity as a shield for exploitation. In Chicago, police raids on 3 houses of charity freed 9 former nuns and 13 young women forced into prostitution. Their testimonies fell like dark rain across court dockets. One woman, recorded only as M.L., spoke of arriving from Wisconsin in 1856, delivered personally by Mother Catherine to a brothel along the river. "If I tried to leave," she told investigators, "they said the church would condemn me as fallen, and if I breathed a word, I'd be hunted by both God and the law." The men named in the ledgers, judges, politicians, wealthy patrons, watched as cases against them dissolved under procedural rulings and sudden witness disappearances. In November 1858, the Chicago Tribune noted with icy restraint, "It appears justice in our city is dispensed only to those lacking powerful friends." In St. Louis, when Monsieur Kelly pursued leads, suggesting more of St. Mary's victims had been trafficked south, he was assaulted by unknown assailants. His injuries, severe enough to send him back to New York, ended the inquiry. Private correspondence between Kelly and Archbishop Hughes, unsealed almost a century later, reveals the Monsieur's belief that the visible portion of this evil is but the tip of a submerged design, protected by wealth, influence, and the Church's own reluctance to confront its failings. The survivors of St. Mary's endured in silence or in struggle. Their names appear in convent rosters, asylum admissions, and too often grave registers. The Church, so quick to veil its scandal, offered them little beyond transfers and admonitions to forget. Witnesses, rescued women whose lines of speech had been mangled by fear, gave testimony that would later make physicians ill. Sister Josephine's child had been taken from her after delivery and placed with a family in another state. Sister Clare described how Mother Catherine made them watch the bodies of those who resisted, buried in the garden as a lesson in obedience. When Father Ryan and Monsieur Kelly stepped onto the vegetable plots indicated by a battered notebook, men with shovels unearthed bone wrapped in tattered cloth, shallow graves where the murdered had been hidden under bean rows and turnips. The investigation widened. Letters seized from hidden safes revealed a commerce that reached Chicago, St. Louis, perhaps New Orleans, addresses and names, payments and instructions. A physician from Chicago, Dr. William Matthews, appeared on several pages. His assessments certified health, virginity, suitability, an appalling certification that increased the market value of the women. A leather notebook, sewn into a mattress, listed the names of the vanished and the prices fetched. Some entries read like inventory, others like confessions of pleasure at domination. Confronted with this, Sister Elizabeth, the woman who had once smiled and taught catechism to frightened orphans, collapsed into silence. In the end, she would plead madness. In the meantime, she gave fragmented accounts of a takeover. The real Mother Catherine, it appeared, had died soon after arriving at St. Mary's. The 3 who ran the place, the woman who had taken the name Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Elizabeth, had not come to consecration so much as to conquest. They had, according to later testimony, been impostors who found in the frontier's rapid expansion a market and a cover. Houses of charity that were not houses of refuge, but warehouses for profit and depravity. When Monsignor Kelly composed his 40-page report, ecclesiastical language strained to contain what he had recorded. He used words like tabula of horrors and unprecedented in the modern church, but language itself falters where such cruelty is described. The civil authorities were called. Guards posted the gates. Men with search warrants and torches searched attics and cellars. Mother Catherine, Sister Margaret, and Sister Elizabeth were placed under ecclesiastical arrest. For a moment it seemed justice would run its course. It did not. Callahan, the burly enforcer, vanished into the night and fled to Chicago. By morning, when sheriffs arrived with civil warrants, the convent's most culpable figures had slipped away. Sister Elizabeth remained, found kneeling in the chapel, a woman unraveled and mute. The locked windows and the sealed doors bore no clear sign of how others had escaped. Some explained it away as secret passages, architectural oddities of a lumber baron's mansion. Others simply remembered the building's age and the ease with which an old house could swallow sinners. What followed was a tangle of confession and concealment. Financial documents seized from hidden safes showed sums that staggered. A mountain of cash moved through coded entries, amounts that in today's currency equated to millions. The leather-bound lists named 23 missing nuns, and in separate columns, 17 orphan girls who'd been trafficked outward. Correspondence revealed arrangements with brothels in Chicago and St. Louis. The language was clinical. A genuine sister of charity, minimum $300, habit and implements, additional $50. The ledger's cold arithmetic said what the battered bodies confirmed. This was systematic, organized, profitable. Arrests followed in some corners. Callahan was captured 6 months later during a Chicago raid and hanged for killing a policeman. He admitted parts of the scheme on the scaffold, but claimed ignorance of those at the top. "They planned for this," he told a prison chaplain. Mother Catherine said they had new skins ready, new names, new places. He grew agitated when asked of the master mentioned in Sister Elizabeth's writings. "Don't ask about him," he warned. "Not someone you want to know." He pressed his ear to the keyhole, and the voice came again, closer to despair than prayer. Before he could knock, a presence unfolded behind him. The calm, surgical authority of Mother Catherine stepping from the shadows, flanked by Sister Margaret, and a man whose hands and jaw read as if carved from timber. The man's name, when Father Ryan later learned it, would be Callahan. In that moment, he felt only the grip of the nun at his sleeve and the polite menace in the man's smile. "Father Ryan," Mother Catherine said, voice smooth as iced water. "This wing is cloistered. There are sisters engaged in advanced spiritual exercises. You must not disturb them." Sister Margaret's eyes met his, cool and small, the kind of glance that catalogs a soul. The laborer, Callahan, stepped forward with the practiced familiarity of one accustomed to moving bodies rather than rosaries. "Monsignor will see you out, Father," he said, and his fingers closed about the priest's arm the way a vice might close on a loose plank. Father Ryan left the convent with the locked door's voice echoing in his mind. He rode hard into town and into action. He chose not to return to Bishop Henney, whose manner had earlier counseled deference and discretion, but to press higher. He wired a terse telegram to Archbishop John Hughes in New York. Grave concerns regarding St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin. Suspicious disappearances of multiple nuns, evidence of imprisonment, possible danger to remaining sisters. Request immediate diocese investigation. Local bishop unresponsive. Father Thomas Ryan, St. Joseph's Parish. The reply came faster than he expected. Archbishop Hughes, stern and unaccustomed to delay, dispatched his personal secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly. The man arrived at St. Mary's on April 17, 1858, accompanied by Father Ryan and 2 senior priests from neighboring parishes. The spring morning was still. Over the bell tower, ravens wheeled like dark punctuation against the sky. Mother Catherine's composure cracked the moment she saw the monsieur's sealed papers. For the first time, her control seemed genuinely unsettled. The inspection that followed stretched through the day and into memory. The priests divided themselves, records in one hand, interviews in another, while the nuns of the visible cloister tried to maintain the practiced serenity of their order. What Father Ryan and Monsignor Kelly found, door by door and ledger by ledger, was a careful architecture of lies and commerce. They opened the locked room in the north wing under ecclesiastical threat and found women reduced to the shape of suffering. 5 nuns, gaunt, soiled, starved into silence, huddled on pallets where storage once lay. Their habits were torn. Their faces, when they lifted them, held the hollow look of those who have been watched and catalogued as if not human. One was pregnant, her abdomen a mute accusation against the vows she had once cherished. Father Ryan helped them to the corridor, and the names, Rebecca, Josephine, Claire, fell like small stones into the investigators' hands. "They prepare us," Sister Rebecca whispered when she could speak. "For the doctor, for the houses. They tell us the men are patrons. They say we are consecrated to a new kind of charity. They cut us, they silence us, they sell us." The words unspooled a pattern. In Sister Margaret's private quarters, beyond a hidden door in the infirmary, the priests found shelves of potent drugs. Laudanum, chloroform, compounds used to render a body compliant. A leather-bound medical journal recorded treatments and assessments of suitability. Neat notation cataloged bodies as if stock. The convent's ledgers told another story. Accounts that did not add up. Deposits far beyond the means of a frontier house of charity. Coded entries, packages delivered, special commissions, matched the dates of disappearances. The deeper they dug, the clearer the arithmetic of exploitation became. Young nuns, noted for their beauty or apparent innocence, were isolated with punitive penances until they could be drugged and moved. Wealthy men, businessmen, judges, men with power, were cataloged as clients. Higher prices were recorded for those described as virginal, higher still for those carrying children. The ledger entries were clinical and monstrous. Transferred, package delivered to Chicago establishment, condition excellent, commission $400. Where resistance arose, the record showed a cruelty sharper than commerce. Terminated, unsuitable for transfer, no commission. Then, one morning in April of 1855, a place in the chapel was empty. Sister Agnes, who had written long letters home to Dublin, letters full of homesick tears and praise for small mercies, was gone. Mother Catherine announced, with the cold finality of a winter gate slamming, that Agnes had been called to a mission in Minnesota. No farewells, no packing seen by witnesses. The sisters searched private nooks and found her things missing, yet in the ledger she was simply transferred. Months later, another young woman failed to appear, and then another. Each disappearance came with the same formula: a sudden reassignment to some distant house, Chicago, Montreal, St. Louis, too far for easy verification. Family inquiries returned formal replies in unfamiliar hands. Years later, handwriting analysts would conclude that many such replies had been penned by a single hand. Rumors grew inside the cloister. Sisters whispered of letters hidden and of penances that grew brutal. Sister Teresa Donovan, practical and blunt from farm work, voiced the unease aloud. Why so many transfers, always the youngest, always the prettiest? Her question was dangerous. Soon after she raised it, she disappeared too. A scrap of paper, half a page torn from her prayer book, found later beneath a pillow, bore the hurried margin note: "Something is wrong. If I disappear, tell Father Ryan." The ink was fresh enough to chill the hand that read it. By 1857, the pattern could no longer be called coincidence. Where 20 junior nuns had once kept precise formation, only 12 remained. The rhythm of the house continued outwardly: bells, meals, charity. But inside, the air was thin with fear. Those who stayed spoke in guarded tones, watched one another's faces, and avoided the north wing where closed doors muffled sounds at night. The punishments escalated. Days of fasting to the point of collapse. Public confessions that edged into humiliation. When a small piece of chocolate arrived from a family and Sister Claire O'Donnell accepted it, she was made to kneel and confess gluttony before the whole community, and then ordered to drink a cup of water and a single piece of bread until she fainted. It was in this atmosphere that Sister Mary Collins, a quiet woman with a devout heart, acted. Terrified and desperate, she slipped a note to a farm boy who delivered milk to the convent. Jimmy Fletcher, 12, freckled and unused to secrets. The note was simple and trembling. "Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns disappearing, not sent away as claimed. I fear for my life. Please send help." With the note, she pressed into the boy's hand a small silver cross, her confirmation gift, the only token of value she carried. Jimmy promised. The boy's feet carried the plea toward the one man the sisters most trusted beyond the convent's walls: Father Thomas Ryan. Father Ryan, a young parish priest, had long felt unease about St. Mary's. He had noticed the attrition. He had noticed the hesitations and explanations. But he was a parish priest. What could he do against a Mother Superior whose donations and connections reached into the highest diocesan coffers? Still, when the note reached him, when the cross lay heavy in his palm, he could not fold it away. He took the path available to raise the alarm through ecclesiastical channels. He rode to Milwaukee and placed the silver cross and the trembling plea at the feet of Bishop John Henney. The bishop listened in a warm, richly furnished study, his talk turning quickly to a cathedral half done, and the funds needed to finish its spire. Protocol, authority, reputation, these were the currencies he guarded. When Father Ryan pressed the facts, the bishop's expression cooled. The convent's transfers were explained. Mother Catherine's generosity had been well noted. No inquiry, he advised gently, was warranted. Father Ryan left discouraged, but the image of the note burned in him. If the proper channels would not act, he would return to St. Mary's himself, this time with a mandate to review its records. He approached the convent in March of 1858, the spring wind slicing his coat, and found a building altered, shutters closed, the bell's voice muted, the garden neglected. The door opened to Sister Elizabeth, her smile thin, and the answers that would meet him inside would be the beginning of a discovery neither he nor the diocese could have imagined. The corridor he slipped into was colder than the parlor had been. The cells opened like closed mouths. Many were empty, their crosses, books, and small comforts gone as if their occupants had simply been erased. Father Ryan, accustomed to the hush of confession and catechism, had not prepared for the sound that came to him then, soft and human and broken. A voice, female, calling through a heavy door as if through a throat of wood and iron. "Father, Father, is that you? Please help us." In the damp, dust-stained vaults of the Wisconsin decease, there lies a bundle of papers the Church has long preferred to forget. For more than a century and a half, these records slept beneath clerical ledgers and absolutions, their edges chewed by time and secrecy. They tell of 23 nuns who vanished from St. Mary's Convent on the windy shore of Lake Michigan between 1854 and 1862. Officials called them clerical anomalies, administrative confusions, the paperwork of a growing institution, but the testimony concealed in inspection reports, the private letters found walled into a refectory cavity, and the uneasy recollections of those who remained sketch a different truth. Something deliberate, systematic, and monstrously intimate had unmade the lives inside those limestone walls. This is the first full telling of what many still regard as the most terrible case of religious corruption in 19th century America, an episode the Church expended both money and influence to bury. If this account chills you, know that thousands of others have felt the same pull. If you seek more of these hidden histories, subscribe to our channel and join the community of listeners across 50 states who search for truth in the ruins. Tell us where you're listening from. But for now, return with me to autumn of 1854, to a morning when fog lay like a shroud over the lake, and a carriage cut through the hush toward a mansion that would become a convent. The building had been a lumber baron's house. Limestone, 3 solemn wings, a bell tower that pierced the skyline. In a landscape of clapboard meeting houses and simple steeples, its Gothic arches and narrow windows seemed almost watchful, as if architecture itself could judge. The church purchased 30 acres of pines and fen as ground for what it hoped would be a bulwark of Catholic life in a predominantly Protestant territory. Bishop William Quarter chose the site deliberately. The institution would be both shelter and signal, a claim staked against the steady advance of Lutheran and Methodist settlers. The arrival of the nuns invited suspicion. Their black habits, their Irish accents, set them apart in a community where German and Scandinavian tongues carried the rhythms of daily worship. "Papists," muttered one elder, watching them process under damp skies. The old fears, foreign rites, unfamiliar hierarchy, stiffened into resentment at the gates. Yet within the chapel's stone hush, Bishop Quarter proclaimed magnanimity. St. Mary's would be mercy in the wilderness, an orphanage, an infirmary, a refuge. He named those who would lead it: Mother Superior Catherine, Sister Elizabeth Foster, Sister Margaret Clark, and the congregation took them in with a mixture of hope and wariness. Mother Catherine arrived from Boston in a black habit that matched the certainty in her face. At 42, she carried authority as easily as breath. Her hands were as apt to soothe as to command. Sister Elizabeth, maternal and careful, took charge of children, teaching letters and catechism with a soft smile. Sister Margaret, slight and precise, tended the infirmary with remedies both learned and traditional. 20 younger women, mostly newly come from Ireland, filled the convent's junior ranks. They knelt in line, their youth betrayed in small gestures, an unguarded laugh, a hand that trembled when no one watched. Their rules were austere. Matins began at 3 in the morning. The bell's metallic voice called women from warmth into stone. Latin chants threaded the day, 7 offices that turned ordinary hours into a litany of obedience. Between prayer, work, laundry, and soup, and the constant, patient tending of the orphanage and the sick, the convent seemed at first a model of pious order. By winter, the orphanage sheltered a dozen children. Sister Elizabeth's hands and patience saved them through fevers. Sister Margaret's tinctures, willow bark for fever, fomentations for chest afflictions, brought relief where distance kept physicians away. Even the most suspicious neighbors came to respect the convent's quiet usefulness, and yet change, subtle and slow, began to enter the stone. A tightness took the communal life. Laughter thinned. Penances hardened from admonitions into ordeals. Minor errors, an accidental cough in prayer, a tardy step, began to invite disproportionate punishment. Sister Josephine Brady, caught coughing in chapel, found herself kneeling on dried peas until her knees bled. Her simple mending became an act conducted through tears. The authority once held by Mother Catherine, at first stern and precise, creased into something less easily catalogued. A kind of iron will that brooked no dissent.